This portion of Election Night is sponsored by General Motors, people building transportation to serve people. By the Bell System, keeping your communication system the best in the world. And by Citicorp Traveler's Checks, travel the world with us. Now from CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Ronald Reagan, the former movie actor, former governor of California, at 69 years old, has taken a strong lead tonight toward becoming the 40th president of the United States. In popular returns, only 3% of the vote is in so far, but it shows Reagan with a 51 to 44% lead over Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, with John Anderson getting some 4% of that vote. And just now, CBS News has been able to estimate that the very important and middle western industrial state of Ohio has fallen to Reagan. Those 25 electoral votes will be added to his count now, which is mounting sizably. No states have been won yet, according to our estimate by Jimmy Carter. Reagan states show in blue. He has won Indiana, Virginia, the important state of Florida, indicating Jimmy Carter's in trouble in his own native South, and now the middle western state of Ohio. That gives Reagan a total of 67 of the electoral votes he needs toward the 270 that he must have to be declared the next president of the United States. Jimmy Carter has compiled so far no electoral votes. Now let's get more on the Ohio result from Dan Rather. Dan?
Walter, Jimmy Carter carried Ohio in 1976 by just about 11,000 votes out of 4 million votes cast. Ronald Reagan went into the race this year believing that Ohio was his best chance to steal away a big electoral vote state that Jimmy Carter got the last time. That's the way it has worked out. Reagan's whole strategy in Ohio went under the title ECBC, ethnic, Catholic, blue-collar votes. The returns indicate not only has Reagan won large in Ohio, but he has won in those traditionally Democratic stronghold areas some votes that Democrats traditionally get. Akron, Toledo, Cleveland, and all of those areas, Reagan clearly cut in with the ECBC vote. Also, in the southern part of Ohio, below the so-called accent line, the last time, Jimmy Carter got a good number of votes that traditionally went to Republicans because of Carter's southern roots and his fundamentalist religious roots. This time, he didn't get those below the accent line in Ohio, and Jimmy Carter, according to our CBS News estimate, has been beaten very badly in Ohio. Too early to say that Jimmy Carter's hopes are dead, but this is a very important nail in his coffin. The states to watch now, in my judgment, are Illinois and Texas, because it's very hard to make any arithmetic where Jimmy Carter could now win the election unless he carries Illinois and Texas, and indeed he might not be able to win the election even if he carries those two. Walter, also just in, Congressman John Bradamus of Indiana, the House Majority Whip, according to our CBS News estimate, has been defeated by the Republican John Hyler in Indiana. Now, Bradamus was thought to be in some difficulty in Indiana because of what was expected to be and what turned out to be the overwhelming victory of Ronald Reagan. But Bradamus, like Birch Bayh, the veteran Democratic senator in Indiana, believed that he could hold on. As it turns out, he could not. Walter?
There's a very interesting story from the United Press here that has just crossed our desk, and it is a report from Washington quoting sources at the White House as saying that Patrick Cadell, the White House pollster, informed President Carter and the First Family last night that he could not win the election today on the basis of their polling results, and that this report says, this United Press report says, that we have no further confirmation for, that President Carter cried on the plane on the way back to planes from Washington. He cast his vote there this morning, and we know that he was somewhat emotional and choked up as he greeted his hometown supporters there at the place where his campaign started, that old railroad depot there in the center of the little town of Plains. Apparently, Bob Strauss, the Democratic National Chairman, according to this United Press report again, for which we have no confirmation, told party workers, the top officials of the party, also last night that it was all over, that there was no hope for the president's election today. This all according to the United Press. As I say, I have no personal confirmation of it at this point.
Walter, I believe that Leslie Stahl had that information just a few minutes ago on her own, and I also heard it. It was said that Cadell, once he checked Ohio, keeping in mind that our CBS News estimate just recently told us that Ronald Reagan has carried the state of Ohio, that Goodell told the president that after Goodell had run one last check in Ohio and had convinced himself that the president had no chance of carrying that state.
What time was that?
Last
When
night?
was that? Last night?
That was last night, yes.
Oh, right. Well, that's the same report then, huh? In the South Carolina Senate race, incidentally, there is a result, I believe, according to our CBS News estimate. Bob Schieffer, you want to give it to us and tell us about President Carter's troubles down there?
Well, this is one place where an incumbent senator did not have to worry about being swept away in a Republican tide, Walter. We see Senator Ernest Hollings winning his race for re-election down there by 74% of the vote. Of course, that is not unexpected. He has had there's just nobody in the state apparently got mad at him during the 6 years he spent in the Senate, and I gave him the prize for having the best quote of the entire campaign season. When told that the New York Times had accused him of being a hawk, Walter, he said, "Why, where I come from, that might be counted as a campaign contribution, a corporate contribution." He said, "That's going to really help." We might check on that Florida race, because that really is bad news for the president, Walter. 17 electoral votes, but the way Mr. Carter is losing Florida tonight, he has never lost a statewide race in Florida, and yet, according to our figures, he's going to lose Florida by a big total. He is running only even in the northern part of the state. That would be the rural part of the state part of the state where he won big the last time out. But we're seeing here, as we're seeing in western Kentucky and some of the other outlying areas of the South, the traditional Democrats are not staying with Jimmy Carter this time. They're only breaking even. We might take a look at Virginia. Virginia, of course, was a gimme this time, but this was a state that Ronald Reagan won by, or that Gerald Ford won by only 49% last time. This time, we show that the Republicans are going to do much better than that, even in this Republican stronghold. And according to just the preliminary data we have, Walter, Mr. Ford is losing, or Mr. Carter is losing in all of the areas where he's doing worse in all of the areas than he did before. Here's the graph that we were looking for. 1980, you can see Carter in Virginia, he got 42% of the vote. In 1976, he got 48%. So that seems to be the story.
CBS News coverage of the presidential election and all the state races will continue in a moment. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, where we see about 4% of the national vote tabulated so far, it's now gone over the 3 million figure, with Ronald Reagan's margin dropping just a little bit. He's now got 41% of the vote there to 51% he's got to 44% for Jimmy Carter. It was a little higher than that, down at the 3% margin. But 4% with 3 million of the votes counted. We expect around 83 to 85 million votes tonight. That's not a great deal. But already we have been able to say at our CBS News estimate desk here, on the basis of our selected precincts, that Ronald Reagan has won 4 states, 2 of them very indicative and very important states. He's won Indiana, Virginia, Florida, and Ohio. Florida cutting into the south for him, Ohio cutting into the deep and important Midwestern industrial states, and the total now is 67 electoral votes for Ronald Reagan and none for Jimmy Carter. Bruce Morton at our trend desk has been looking into what the Anderson difference is in this vote so far. Bruce?
Well, Walter, what we've been doing is pulling through all the statistics here, trying to see some of the elements in this early Reagan lead, and John Anderson is clearly one factor. Overall, the Anderson voters we polled said that if he were out of the race, they'd have split about evenly between Carter and Reagan. But in some groups, that split is uneven. For instance, Reagan is running just about the way Gerald Ford did 4 years ago amongst Jewish voters. But Jimmy Carter is running much worse than he did 4 years ago. Anderson does relatively well with Jewish voters, and that's the difference. Again, with voters who identify themselves as independents, Reagan runs just about as well as Ford did. But Carter runs a lot worse than he did last time. Anderson does pretty well with independents, and again, he could make the difference. Now, there's some groups where Reagan is doing better than Ford did. He does better with blue-collar workers, better with Catholics, and better with white Protestants, including white Protestants in the South. And then there's some other areas where Carter campaign attacks seem to have failed. Reagan leads among older voters, so apparently they weren't afraid that he would batter the Social Security system somehow. And on war and peace, our exit poll didn't deal with that directly, but we did find that most voters throughout the country thought the United States ought to act more toughly with the Russians. And not surprisingly, they were for Reagan. Walter?
Bill Plant standing by outside Ronald Reagan's home out in Pacific Palisades, California. Bill? I'm sorry, Bill Plant, we're not getting your audio. We'll try to come back to you a little later when we can get that small technical glitch fixed, which I assume will be any second now. CBS News Election Night coverage will continue in a moment.
It happens when Dracula comes to New York.
I can give you eternal life. I knew it, an insurance salesman.
George Hamilton and Susan St. James.
Well, Count, what do you say to that?
A network television premiere.
That's the other one, isn't it?
The Count gets a taste of the Big Apple in Love at First Bite. Wednesday at 9, 8 Central.
Tomorrow on CBS.
We can assume that Ronald Reagan, out at his home in Pacific Palisades, California, a part of the Los Angeles complex, is very happy as these early returns come in. The results that we've been able to call so far indicate that he is walking away with this election, at least up to this time. Bill Plant, we tried to reach a moment ago. Let's try once more and see if we can hear him this time. Bill?
Well, Walter, as I was telling you, Ronald and Nancy Reagan are getting ready to leave their home here in Pacific Palisades to go to dinner, which is an election night tradition for them. But the people that they'll be sitting around the dinner table with are old friends like Justin Dart, the attorney William French Smith, Holmes Tuttle. These are the people who urged Ronald Reagan to enter politics after they watched him speak on behalf of Barry Goldwater in the 1964 presidential election. So we can imagine that tonight will give them all considerable satisfaction. Walter, the size of Reagan's apparent victory does not, we're told, come as a surprise to his pollster, Richard Worthlin. In conversations yesterday with reporters, Worthlin insisted that he would get at least 320 electoral votes. That seemed a little high to some of us who'd been watching it, but in light of today's events, it apparently, or at least may not be that high at all.
Bill, the people he's having dinner with tonight are indeed those who urged him to get into politics. And some of us who covered that campaign back in 1964 remember Ronald Reagan being the warm-up speaker for Barry Goldwater rallies in California. And I've often wondered if one particular rally at Knott's Berry Farm down south of Los Angeles wasn't the one where he first got the spark. He stood there, and it was one of the first warm-up rallies he did for Goldwater. And it just seemed that as he came off the stage and introduced what he said was the next president of the United States, turned out as one prediction he was a little bit wrong on, but they can give that as a campaign oratory. He came down into the crowd and into the group where we in the press were standing, and it just seemed to me that a man stepped off that platform having made up his mind, this is pretty heady stuff, I might get into that.
You know, Walter, we've heard Ronald Reagan mention that rally at Knott's Berry Farm. Apparently, though, it was that speech that he gave on television, which was so well received by the Goldwater Republicans and members of the party, which really did the trick and convinced his friends to work on him and gave him the idea that he ought to run for office. And, of course, he did.
Right. We'll keep coming back to you frequently this evening, Bill. Carry on.
Thank you, Walter.
We have been able to say here at CBS News so far this evening that Ronald Reagan has taken 4 states definitely, including very important ones of Florida and Ohio, as well as Virginia and Indiana, giving him a 67-0 lead in the Electoral College count, which is, of course, is the way we elect our presidents. Each state's majority is taken, and on the basis of all of those votes, each state casts its electoral votes, assigned on the basis of how many congressmen and senators it has. So far tonight, that's 67 toward the 270 needed for Ronald Reagan. A word about the basis on which we give our estimates of winners and how we call states in one column or the other. We make those estimates strictly on the basis of sample precincts of actual voters casting votes in those precincts. That is, after the votes are counted in those precincts. So-called exit polling, in which voters are interviewed when they leave the polling place, which we report on too, of course, is a useful tool on Election Day to help analyze voter attitudes and so forth. But exit polling is, after all, simply a poll of what voters said they did, not a measure of what they actually did do. So we don't base our estimates on such polling at all. So when you hear the CBS News has made an estimate of an election, given a certain race in a certain state to a candidate, one candidate or the other, you know that that base is based on actual votes and taken from selected precincts, which are carefully weighed on the basis of their previous performance in previous presidential elections, not on the basis of election polls. You wanted to get that little point straight with you, we could. At this point now, at 8:20 in the evening, the Eastern Time, more than half of the states have closed either all or part of their polling places. And most of them, some 24 of them, have closed all of their polling places, as well as the District of Columbia, and we expect the actual returns to be pouring in now very shortly. 5% of the vote is now counted, national vote, and the percentages have not changed. Reagan still has 51%, Carter 44%, and John Anderson 4%. Harry Reasoner, how do the races look now in the East?
Well, we're going to be getting a flood of reports from the East now. All the polls are closed in every state except New York, Rhode Island, and part of Maine. But so far, we said one of the things we said before the election is the one sure state for Carter was West Virginia, and about 2% of the vote has been counted in West Virginia. And looking at that board, it's about 10,000 for Carter and 8,000 for Reagan. But the CBS News estimate calls West Virginia still close. So even West Virginia might be in trouble, along with apparently no trouble in the other thing that was regarded as sure Carter country, the District of Columbia. The thing about the East, considering what we've been hearing from the South and from the Midwest, is that it would have to be a very unusual area to do much for Jimmy Carter. In the East, only once since 1960, and that was the McGovern year, has the Democratic candidate gotten less than 108 electoral votes, and typically they've gotten over 130. If you consider those early calls in the South and the Midwest, Carter would have to have at least 125 or 130 in the East to make up for losses in the rest of the country, and that just is not in the cards, Walter.
What about your Senate races? Have you got any indications at all how those are going?
We have not really seen much in the so-called grudge match in New Hampshire between John Durkin and Warren Rudman. They've got 3% of the vote in. In Rudman, the Republican is leading by about 4 percentage points, but I don't think that's significant yet. In New Hampshire, that's a gubernatorial race there, where another rematch between Hugh Gallen and Meldon Thompson. Thompson is holding a narrow lead, but again, it's less than 3% of the vote. In Pennsylvania, where there's the so-called match of the losers, Pete Flaherty and Arlen Specter, both who have tried several times for statewide office and have never won. One of them has to win tonight, and again, with a very small amount of vote in, Specter is ahead, but that could be Philadelphia vote or it could be anything. The East is, I don't know why we're backwards tonight, but we are.
Well, I suppose they're catch-up, and when you do it, as you said, it'll be with a flood. Well, it's been 2 years now since Philip Crane, the Republican representative, congressman from Illinois, declared that he was going to run for the Republican presidential nomination. He ran very hard and very long, but he didn't get anywhere with that campaign. But in those 2 years, it's been a very long process, which we're calling a finish to tonight. With 5% of the national vote counted now, the percentages are staying just the same, 51% for Reagan, 44% for Carter, 4% for Anderson. Not terribly different from what the last polls of the last few days before this election day indicated the returns might be across the country. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News Election Headquarters.
From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
The nation went to the polling places today in this 49th presidential election of our history, and with 6% of the vote counted now, Ronald Reagan, who is challenging as the Republican candidate, is holding on to a 51% lead over the incumbent Democrat Jimmy Carter, who has 44%. John Anderson, the independent candidate, has 4% of the vote so far. The states that Ronald Reagan has won, according to our CBS News estimate, the very important ones of Florida and Ohio, as well as Indiana and Virginia, for a total of 67 electoral votes toward the 270 he needs. But indications are across the rest of the states, and more than half of the states' polls have now closed, are that Reagan is running well ahead in nearly all of them, and it is beginning to look like a Reagan sweep tonight, although, of course, a lot of votes, 94% of them, are yet to be counted. There is an Associated Press story from the White House tonight that indicates that President Carter is ready to concede the election to Ronald Reagan. It says that he was prepared to concede. He called to Jody Powell, his news secretary, and apparently, according to the AP story, Mr. Powell talked him out of conceding yet. Powell was overheard to say, according to this AP story, "Mr. President, you'd better wait a few minutes more." The telephone call just came from upstairs in the living quarters of the White House, downstairs to Jody Powell's office, I presume, on the ground floor of the White House. The election returns throughout have been favoring the Republicans. We also have reported that one of the leading Democratic senators in Indiana, targeted by conservative groups for defeat this year, Birch Bayh in Indiana, has lost his race to the Republican Dan Quayle. Well, the voting groups where this vote has come from is piling up for Reagan. Where has it been in the East that you can tell so far, Harry?
We've been sorting through our poll, Walter, and the figures tell the story of what's happening so far. Among Democrats, 75% voted for Carter in 1976, 65% this year. Among Jews, 66% in 1976, 52% this year. Among liberals, or people who call themselves liberals, 70% in 1976, 59% this year. Among independents, 49% down to 38% this year. He's down in union groups, 59% in 1976, 49% this year. So he's down in every area where he got his big support in 1976. And, you know, it seems to me, looking back on the campaign, every time you heard Ronald Reagan speak, at one time or another in the talk, he would say, "How many of you think you are better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And, of course, speaking to Republican groups, hardly anybody thought they were. Well, the poll indicates that 3-1 among Eastern voters, they think they're worse off than they were a year ago. They're voting resentment. They're voting antagonism this year, obviously.
Dan, the Middle West, you think the same thing applies?
Pretty much the same thing, Walter. It's obvious that, as Bruce Morton has mentioned earlier, and Harry touched upon earlier, that one of the big stories tonight, when you ask why is Ronald Reagan doing so well, for example, in Ohio, which according to our CBS News estimate, Ronald Reagan has won, Reagan has done better among men. He did not do better among women. The polls were wrong, and frankly, I, as a reporter, was wrong, because I felt that Ronald Reagan, the difference for Jimmy Carter might very well be that women would go to Carter. But in the Midwest, at least, Carter is doing about as well among women as he did in 1976. On a man-woman basis, it breaks down that where Carter is losing it in the Midwest is among men. Now, in other ways to break it down, Carter's down 20% among blue-collar workers in the Midwest. He's down 17% among union voters.
Dan, let me interrupt you. Another major and big state has gone to Ronald Reagan, according to our CBS News estimate. That state is Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania and Ohio having gone for Reagan, those are two of the major ones in the Middle West that Jimmy Carter had to depend upon winning at least one of to win. It would seem that Carter is in serious, serious trouble now with Pennsylvania and Ohio, both counted in his column. The margin at right now, with 2% of the vote counted, shows only 48 to 46. But our CBS News estimate is that when all the votes are counted, Reagan will be the winner in Pennsylvania. Adding its big block of votes now, it's one of the big 10 states on to the previous total that Reagan had on his electoral votes, gives him 101 electoral votes to none for Jimmy Carter. 5 states, CBS News is able to say now, are in the Reagan column definitely. That's Indiana, Virginia, and 3 big ones in the top 10 states, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Those are the top 10 states in their electoral count, of course, the ones that count toward that 270 electoral votes. So Reagan's lead widens, and we now have 7% of the national vote in. But the percentages do not change nationally. It's still 51% for Reagan, 44% for Carter, and 4% for John Anderson. Strangely, John Anderson holding at just 4% as we've climbed from 2%, 1% of the vote. He got 4% in the first 1% we had, and through 7%, it's still 4%. That's not enough for him to get those federal matching funds he wanted so desperately. And the day when John Anderson left the polling place with his wife, Kiki Anderson, at that time they were asked what they would do if they didn't get the matching funds, which might leave them as much as $7 million in debt. A lot of money for a country lawyer from Illinois, although he spent a long time in Congress. He amassed no funds from that, we are led to believe. She said, we're both going to go to work. And now another state in Reagan's column, although this one's scarcely a surprise, Kansas, deep in Republican territory there in the heartland of America, has again gone Republican and given its votes to Ronald Reagan. And another big one for Reagan, another big one. New Jersey has gone for Ronald Reagan. That was considered to be a toss-up state, but leaning toward Reagan. It is thought that it probably would go Reagan, but the Carter forces were hoping for a last-minute miracle there. They got none. New Jersey goes for Reagan, too, and now Reagan's states would look like this on a map. Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, all for Reagan, along with Indiana and Virginia, for a total of 118 electoral votes, none for Jimmy Carter. It looks like quite a sweep, doesn't it, gentlemen?
It does indeed.
Looks like a big one.
Before the election, Dan and I agreed that it was Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Illinois. Well, he's won 2 out of those 3.
Well, it seems to me that that's exactly where we are now. We're all aware that a lot of people around the country now are guessing that Ronald Reagan is the winner. And so you say, well, why doesn't CBS News just throw up its hands and say Ronald Reagan's the winner? Illinois and Texas are 2 big reasons. That we simply do not have, nobody has enough information yet to determine how Illinois and Texas are going to go. But certainly in the Midwest, if it continues as it's going now, it does not look good for Jimmy Carter in any of the 3 big states, Michigan, Illinois, or Ohio, keeping in mind that according to our CBS News estimate, Ronald Reagan already has won Ohio.
I wonder, in Pennsylvania, I wonder how much is due to Mayor Bill Green in Philadelphia and what happened, his long and deep support for Ted Kennedy. I wonder how hard he worked.
I got a return from one of your states over there. While you were talking, I was reading. Connecticut, which was thought to be something of an indicator this year, has gone for Ronald Reagan. Connecticut also for Reagan, and Oklahoma, a state that Jimmy Carter lost in 1976, again goes for the Republican Reagan this year, and that boosts the Reagan electoral total to 134 votes to none for Carter, 270 needed. But all of these indicator states are dropping into Reagan's lap. According to our CBS News estimate of our selected precincts, scientifically selected precincts, and it certainly looks like it's coming up to be a Reagan electoral landslide, if not a popular one. On the popular vote, with 7% in, it's still 51% for Reagan, 44% for Carter. CBS News coverage of the presidential election and all the state races will continue in a moment. I believe believe me, I can't. Tell them I can't. Here at our CBS News election headquarters, our CBS News estimate is now that Jimmy Carter has won his first state tonight, and that is his home state of Georgia. CBS News estimate can say that he will get the 12 electoral votes in Georgia, which puts him into the electoral column for the first time tonight. However, CBS News estimate also is that Reagan will win in New Hampshire. So that balances out, and at the moment that gives Reagan 138 electoral votes to 12 for Jimmy Carter, the incumbent. And in a Senate race in Kansas, Bob Dole, who ran as a vice presidential running mate with Jerry Ford in 1976, was running now to go back to the United States Senate. He has won his race in Kansas. Also, in the District of Columbia, as expected, CBS News can estimate that Jimmy Carter has won the District of Columbia. In Connecticut, a Senate race has just been estimated by CBS News, and that will go to the Democrat, Christopher Dodd. Christopher Dodd, who is the son of a longtime the late Democratic senator from Connecticut, Tom Dodd. Christopher Dodd has defeated James Buckley, who was one time a senator from New York. He was trying to be the first man ever elected in modern times and under the modern popular election system to the United States Senate from 2 states. Well, James Buckley failed at that, and the more modern and liberal Dodd has won over the conservative Jim Buckley in Connecticut, although Connecticut has gone for Ronald Reagan in the presidential race, according to our CBS News estimate. A split vote in Connecticut, in the first state we've seen a split vote tonight. Jed Duval is following tonight's results at the White House. Jed?
Walter, they saw this coming, of course. Bob Strauss, the campaign chairman, whom you know, called his staff into his office apparently late this afternoon around 4 o'clock and told them to act with class tonight, use some decorum, and go out with style, apparently alerting people, softening them up to the idea that there might be this kind of an evening. They saw it coming last week, and as you know, the sampling that was taken on a regular basis showed up Wednesday and Thursday and Friday of last week that things were softening for Mr. Carter. It showed up on the campaign trail. We saw crowds that told us the same thing, roughly, that the Cadell polls were telling the White House people at about the same time. They sensed it coming back a little bit over the weekend, but then they lost it again. I asked one man in here, one of the research officials here, Walter, why this? And he said it was the hostages. The election turned out to be a referendum on the hostages. I said, wasn't it the debate? And he said, no, Reagan won the debate, but he didn't win it that big. Walter?
Thank you. CBS News election night coverage will continue in a moment. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, where all the indicators are for a big sweep by Ronald Reagan toward being the 40th President of the United States. The numbers don't add up yet from all of the states. Of course, all the polls haven't closed yet, even across the country, but those are the indicators. And the national vote, not quite 10%. The vote has been counted so far, and Ronald Reagan has 51% of the vote to 43% for Jimmy Carter. John Anderson, who was at 4% through most of the count this evening, has now climbed to that magic number of 5 he needs to get matching federal funds. And here is a very important vote count by CBS News. We estimate that Texas will go to Ronald Reagan, another one of the big ones to Ronald Reagan. It's beginning to look like a Reagan sweep of this country on this election day. He's now taken all of the major states which we have been able to estimate so far: Ohio, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, all of those in the top 10 states as to electoral count, and now Texas falls his way. It is very big for him. The Carter, their states show in red, the Reagan states in blue on our map. We have not put Texas in that map yet because we just called it, but Texas now will go blue for Ronald Reagan. As you see, Carter has won only 2 states, the District of Columbia, hardly a state, but would like to be one. The District of Columbia has 3 electoral votes, and Carter's home state of Georgia. Reagan now has 164 electoral votes to 15 for Jimmy Carter. It's impossible on the number of votes cast and counted so far to say that Ronald Reagan has won the presidency, but it is certainly possible also, and all of the indications are that that is the way it is going tonight. Bill Moyers, I think it's not too early to talk about what a Reagan presidency might be like.
Well, Walter, I was reared to beware the man who draws the moral before the tale is told, but what the heck? What can we expect from a Reagan administration other than Billy Carter's scalp? Well, I think you'll see a lot of businessmen being summoned to Washington to run things, as Reagan, in fact, called businessmen to Sacramento when he was governor. The Equal Rights Amendment won't get any boost from the White House, and Shirley Hufstedler won't get boosted to the Supreme Court. Indeed, William Rehnquist will soon have, if there are vacancies, some company from other strict constructionists on the Supreme Court. It'll be Donnie and Marie Osmond after dinner entertainment at the White House instead of Charlie Daniels and Waylon Jennings. Ralph Nader will have to give back his pass to the Environmental Protection Agency, and the energy companies will consolidate their monopoly over the Energy Department. Reagan wants to cut personal income tax rates. How much will depend on Congress. But the government will probably take some of that money back you get with its protectionist policies to support the auto industry in the Midwest, which is going for Reagan. If Reagan gets his way as president, all of those categorical grants that Congress has been giving for this program and that program would get replaced by block grants that go directly from Congress to state and local government. The moral majority will arrive in town waving the Ten Commandments instead of the Bill of Rights. Watch some of them to show up on the FCC and in the Department of Education if the Department of Education isn't declared a contaminated area. There will be more benefits for veterans and bigger subsidies for the Maritime Union, which has endorsed Reagan. And the Pentagon will get all those arms it wants, probably the biggest arms buildup since the missile age began. The B-1 bomber, more ICBMs, more missile silos, more of what the experts call bullets to stop bullets. There won't be any panning after the SALT treaty, and the Russians won't get any RSVPs for a while. There will probably be a tilt back in southern Africa toward the white regime in South Africa, and the military governments of South America will have a friend in Washington for a change. If the White House gets its way under Ronald Reagan, all of you out west can drive 70 miles an hour again without fear of a ticket. The real question, Walter, is whether the conservatives who gave their heart to Reagan a long time ago will have those hearts broken. He's the first conservative to win the White House in a long time. And the question that bedevils the conservatives is, will the fortunes of the party now become more important to Ronald Reagan than those conservative principles he's espoused so long? Most presidents move to the middle. We've seen in this campaign Ronald Reagan literally change his spots in front of our eyes, quoting Franklin Delano Roosevelt and stealing from John Kennedy's tax policies. An interesting question now to bewitch the conservatives watching these returns. Walter?
Thank you, Bill. CBS News estimates now that South Dakota, as expected, is going to Ronald Reagan tonight, adding its 4 electoral votes to his total, making it 172. In the Senate race in Illinois, Alan Dixon, the Democratic candidate, has defeated Paul O'Neill there, according to our CBS News estimate. In the Maryland Senate race, the incumbent, Charles Mathias Jr., has been returned to the United States Senate over Edward Conroy, his Democratic challenger, according to the CBS News estimate there. Well, it looks like tonight Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, will be evicted from the White House on the basis of Ronald Reagan's candidacy by the Republican this year. That will mean that for the first time in 92 years, since 1888, a Democrat seeking to run for a second term has been rejected by the voters. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
This portion of Election Night is sponsored by a company called TRW, where tomorrow is taking shape. By General Motors, people building transportation to serve people. And by Conoco, producing oil, natural gas, coal, uranium, and petrochemicals. And now from CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Ronald Reagan appears to be heading toward a landslide electoral victory tonight across the United States and all sections of the country. And now another deep blow for Jimmy Carter in his native South. The CBS News can estimate that Alabama will fall to Ronald Reagan, as well as Florida, which already has gone to him, a major state there, and the state of Texas and the state of Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, with some 13 states now that we have been able to estimate on the basis of actual voting in precincts across the country, those 13 states, Jimmy Carter has won only one state, and the District of Columbia. Georgia has gone to him, his native state, and the District of Columbia. But all the other states are shown in blue that Reagan has won. Now with Alabama, as you saw, just added to that number. Carter's states show in red. It means that in electoral vote, Ronald Reagan now has 177 electoral votes to Jimmy Carter's 15 electoral votes. That is a long way toward the 270 now that Ronald Reagan needs to be declared the 40th President of the United States. We're beginning to get returns in more heavily now from the eastern states. We can report also on a Senate race in Alabama. We have now two. That seat has been taken by a Republican from Alabama. For the first time, a Republican senator since Reconstruction will go to Washington representing Alabama. He is Jeremiah Denton, a former war hero, a longtime prisoner of the Viet Cong in Vietnam. 7.5 years he was behind bars there. That admiral has won the race in Alabama, and we'll have more from that from Bob Schieffer in a few moments. But right now, let's take a look at some of the returns pouring in from the east now with the polls closing there. New York is just closed. Harry Reasoner, what do we have?
Well, there are no returns reported yet from New York. New York would be the first chance for Jimmy Carter to get a big state. Before the election, they thought New York leaned slightly toward Carter, but the way things have been going tonight, that doesn't hold up probably. The key states in the east so far have all gone for Ronald Reagan. Pennsylvania, where Reagan is running better among the Democrats than among Republicans than Ford did in 1976, and where Carter and John Anderson together are not doing as well as Carter did in 1976.
Let me interrupt just a moment, Harry, because another one of the liberal senators targeted by conservatives to be removed from the Senate has been removed tonight. In South Dakota, George McGovern, who carried his party's banner in 1972 as the presidential candidate, has been retired from the Senate by James Abner, who has won in South Dakota. That Republican will go to Washington.
I was just talking about Pennsylvania, where there's one indication that the kind of vote you're getting tonight is anti-Carter rather as well as much as pro-Reagan, because the senatorial race there between the Democrat Pete Flaherty and the Republican Arlen Specter is rated by the CBS News estimate as very close, whereas the presidential race was not very close at all. CBS News estimates that Governor Reagan took it by 51% to 42% for Jimmy Carter. In New Jersey, which had been thought to lean toward Reagan, it was a victory bigger than they expected, and that cut deeply into the traditional Republican strengths or Democratic strengths among labor and among blacks and among ethnic minorities. In New Hampshire, which had been figured to go for Ronald Reagan, the victory was bigger than anybody thought it would be, at 62%, 59% for Ronald Reagan to 31% for Jimmy Carter. And in Connecticut, where I think the chief thing was proven was that Ronald Reagan does not scare traditional Eastern moderate Republicans. He won Connecticut very handily, 48% to 39% for Carter, according to the CBS News estimate. One thing that is happening in the East, Walter, that may have some effect on John Anderson's pocketbook and may enable Kiki not to have to go to work. He's doing better in the East than he did in the rest of the country. It may raise him on an average above the 5% that he needs to get that federal money.
We have 13% of the national vote in now, and Reagan is holding right at 51%, but Anderson has come up to 5%, and that 1% is been taken away from Carter, who's dropped from 44 to 43, with 13% of the vote counted now. Our CBS News estimate in the Nebraska presidential race is that Ronald Reagan has won Nebraska, as was expected. No surprise there at all, but it increases his electoral vote count now to 182 toward the 270 needed. A short while ago, Jerry Bowen talked in Los Angeles with Stuart Spencer and a high Reagan campaign advisor, and we want to call in Jerry now. Jerry?
Was how well he did in the debate in Cleveland. But I think the secondary thing, and early on probably the most important thing, is the fact that the Carter campaign was designed to make Ronald Reagan the record. Ronald Reagan the issue, not the record. And the situation involved was that Ronald Reagan, being the great communicator that he is, he was able to turn that around and make the Jimmy Carter record the issue in the campaign.
It has been said by you and other senior advisors that Jimmy Carter never realized, never knew fully how to use the incumbency to run for re-election. Do you stand by that based on the...
Yes, I'll stand by that. I think that they did a very good job in 1976 running as a non-incumbent. But in this year, as the incumbent, they just couldn't get a handle on how you run as an incumbent. And having been there in 1976, I realize that that is a very difficult situation sometimes, particularly when the presidency itself is under attack.
Rather interesting to hear Stuart Spencer say that Carter could not get a handle on how to run as an incumbent when the Republican camp had been charging all through the campaign that he was doing just that to a fare-you-well, giving out largesse from the federal coffers with a abandon that only a presidential candidate running for re-election could. But now Stuart Spencer apparently is changing that line from the Republican camp. Earlier tonight, Diane Sawyer talked about tonight's results with Senator John Heinz of Pennsylvania.
I'm starting to hear revived talk around here about the possibility of the magical 9, control of the Senate. What do you think?
I think it's a very real possibility. Governor Reagan's doing very well. Our candidates have been doing very well. The first sign, of course, was when Dan Quayle won quite handily in Indiana. There'll be 4 or 5 states to watch tonight, such as Wisconsin, Vermont, New York, Washington State, Idaho. If we start to do well in those states, in the Senate races, we could be very well headed for control of the Senate, which will be the first time in 25 years that Republicans have controlled that body.
What would be your conservative projection right now on the number you net?
I think we're headed for a net gain of 7 seats, which will take us from 41 to 48 seats, within 2 seats of seizing control of the Senate.
John Heinz is the head of the Senate Campaign Committee for the Republicans this year. In Arkansas, in the Senate race there, Democrat Dale Bumpers, as expected, is a winner over William Clark, according to our CBS News estimate. And in the Oklahoma Senate race, Republican Don Nichols will be the winner, according to our CBS News estimate. He'll get some 55% of the vote to 45% of the vote for the Democratic candidate Andy Coates. It was expected that Coates might very well win that seat and take it away from the Republicans. Henry Bellman, the president's senator from Oklahoma, is retiring this year, but that state will stay in the Senate, in the Republican hands, and that gives the Republicans a much better chance to get that majority in the Senate that John Heinz was saying he hoped they got just a moment ago. Bruce Morton at our trend desk has been looking into the disparity between the close presidential polls over the weekend and the actual results we're seeing so far tonight. Bruce?
Walter, I think you have to say this is a tough year to be in the polling business. Almost all the final national opinion polls, the ones that came out this past weekend, showed, as you know, a very close race. And this does not, so far, look like a very close race, certainly not a close electoral race. We tried to see who changed over the weekend and maybe why. We did that by comparing today's exit polling with all those weekend polls. Reagan did a lot better among rural voters in our exit poll today than our final poll over the weekend showed he would. And among the Vietnam generation, the people now in their 30s, Reagan did a lot better today than he did in that final poll. Reagan improved among union members. Carter led among them in our final public opinion poll by a larger margin than he did today. Reagan improved among white Protestants, improved among conservatives, not that he was ever a loser with them. And he even improved among people whose family finances have gotten better during the past year. I don't know quite why. Why the overall improvement over this past weekend? Maybe negative voting. The people who told us today that they had decided late were more likely than the rest of our sample to say they were voting against somebody. That's a statistic. Let me add one hunch, Walter. One person I talked to this evening says it's simple, that there are a lot of closet Reagan voters. They wouldn't tell a pollster they were for Reagan, but they would mark a ballot for him. Walter?
Well, we hear that every election, I think, Bruce, to be in all honesty, that if the polls are wrong, they're closet voters, which seems to be perfectly obvious. They didn't tell the pollsters what they were going to do. I'll buy that, in other words. We'll have more CBS News election night coverage in a moment. Ronald Reagan rolling toward a victory tonight that in electoral votes might compare with the victory of Richard Nixon over George McGovern in 1972. That's a long statement to make, and a prediction that would have to mean that he's going to sweep all the rest of the states practically. Carter has won only 2 states so far, Georgia and the District of Columbia. We're counting it as a state for this purpose, with 15 electoral votes to some 12 states for Reagan, with a total of 182 electoral votes. And that includes, however, some very key indicator states. Texas and Florida in the South, for instance. Alabama in the South have gone for Reagan. Also in the Middle West, Ohio has gone for Reagan. In the East, Pennsylvania and New Jersey have gone for Reagan. Connecticut has gone for Reagan. As I say, it looks like a sweep, and it could be almost as big as that one in 1972. In the South, Jimmy Carter in big trouble there, and Bob Schieffer can tell us about it.
Of all the returns coming in tonight, I suppose the ones coming in from the southern region must be the most hurtful to the people in the Carter White House, because President Carter is not just losing across the South tonight, he's losing badly. And the numbers tell the story. Let's look first at Texas. In Texas, the state that Mr. Carter won with 51% of the vote in 1976, he has lost, CBS News says that Reagan will get 56% of the vote there. In Texas, as in elsewhere across the South, it is those yellow dog Democrat districts, places where in the past people would vote for a yellow dog if he were running on the Democratic ticket. They're finding in those areas this year that at least some of the people are willing to vote for Ronald Reagan, because Reagan is cutting in again and again in those traditional areas all across the South. Mr. Carter is breaking even in those areas where he won sometimes 2 to 3 to 1 all across the South, and he is losing in the areas, the suburban areas around the South, where in 1976 he was able to split the vote. In Georgia, Mr. Carter's home state, where he won with a considerable margin in 1976, more than 60% of the vote, we show him winning only by 57% of the vote. He won with 66% of the vote in Georgia in 1976. Oklahoma, always a strong Republican state in recent years, but Gerald Ford carried it with only 50% of the vote in 1976. This year, it looks as if Mr. Reagan will carry it with more than 60% of the vote. And in Florida, a state that was considered so close just 2 days ago, it looks as if Ronald Reagan will win with 57% of the vote, again scoring heavily in the rural areas. And we also show Ronald Reagan running strong, Walter, in southern Florida. Now, that's hard to believe. That's always been a strong Democratic area, southern Florida. But tonight, Ronald Reagan winning in that part of Florida.
CBS News coverage of the presidential election, all the state contests, will continue in a moment. Two more states in the Reagan column, according to our CBS News estimates of votes actually cast in our sample precincts. In those states, Missouri has gone to Ronald Reagan. That was a state that it was believed that Carter would hold this year. And New Mexico, a state which also the Reagan people had thought might go to Carter, just might go, has gone to Ronald Reagan. He's got both Missouri and New Mexico now, and another big one fallen to Reagan, Michigan. Michigan has gone to Reagan. Ohio and Michigan now in the Middle West, both for Reagan. It really leaves Jimmy Carter almost nowhere to go to still pick up a majority of votes tonight in all sections of the country. He has lost in areas where he had to show some strength, at least to win. He's lost in the East with Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut. He's lost in the Middle West with Ohio and Michigan, and Pennsylvania in the East, did I say? He's lost in the South with Texas, Florida, and Alabama, and the West is going to Reagan as expected. Perhaps Dan Rather can tell us now, and as I report that it's 219 electoral votes, by the way, for Reagan. He needs 270. Carter's only got 15 electoral votes from his own state of Georgia and the District of Columbia. Dan, tell us about what happened in Michigan now.
Well, in Michigan, Walter, the question was whether Ronald Reagan would be perceived as too conservative for ethnic, black, and blue-collar voters in Michigan. You recall last time that native son Jerry Ford carried it for the Republicans in the presidential race by a very narrow margin, and it was thought that Carter had a shot at Michigan this time. It turned out not to be the case. He simply could not hold behind him the traditional Democratic coalition in Michigan. It wasn't the case that he didn't get the vote out. It wasn't the case that the John Anderson kept him from winning in Michigan. He couldn't keep the traditionally Democratic votes with him in Michigan. And, Walter, I recognize that CBS News, on our estimates, we haven't said that the race is over, but it more and more begins to look like, turn out the lights, the party is over, because the only one of the major Midwestern industrial states that you figured Jimmy Carter had to carry tonight to have any chance, at which we do not have enough returns on yet to make an estimate, is in Illinois with 26 electoral votes. And even if Jimmy Carter carried that, it would not look good for him. Let's take a look at the overall presidential race in the Midwest. Ohio has gone to Reagan. Indiana has gone to Reagan. Walter, we're just about out of time, I'm told, but the fact of the matter is, as of this hour, the biggest question is whether it's going to be a complete blowout of the liberal Democratic senators in the Midwest. Birch Bayh has already gone down to defeat on the basis of our estimate, and so has George McGovern.
And the same is true in House races, which we're going to be able to tabulate very shortly. Reagan's coattails may be very broad this year. It may be quite a Republican sweep when all the votes are in. As you pointed out, Dan, we cannot say on the basis of the actual number of votes we can count so far that Reagan has won the presidency, but it seems almost impossible now for Jimmy Carter to possibly come back. All sections of the country are going for Reagan and going very big. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Not quite 1/5 of the nation's vote has been counted on this election day, but Ronald Reagan has jumped into a very early and a sweeping lead. With 18% of the vote in, he has 51% of the vote. Carter, 43% of the vote, to 5% for independent John Anderson at this point in the counting. But the big count, of course, is in electoral states, and those percentage leads of Reagan's have counted in the states where the big electoral votes are throughout the nation, in Florida and Texas and Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, and now we can add on to that North Dakota, which was expected to fall to Reagan, giving him a total of 18 states. Rhode Island has gone to Jimmy Carter, however. That's the second state, plus the District of Columbia, that Jimmy Carter has won. He has a total of 19 electoral votes now to some 222 electoral votes for Reagan. Reagan needing only 270 electoral votes, of course, to be declared the 40th President of the United States. Declared so tonight. He won't be declared officially that until the electoral votes are counted in the joint session of Congress on January 5th. Finally, we have first returns coming in from the West, where these popular percentages are supposed to increase drastically and dramatically for Ronald Reagan. And Leslie Stahl can tell us about that. Leslie?
Yes, Walter, according to our CBS exit poll, Ronald Reagan is doing
leading Jimmy Carter by percentages much greater than he is in the rest of the country. As you told us before, Walter, so far CBS News estimates that Ronald Reagan will win at least one of the western states, that's New Mexico. The Carter campaign had thought at one point that the president had a chance there if they could get a large turnout, but turnout is down 7% over last time, according to the CBS projections. Jimmy Carter almost won New Mexico last time, but as you can tell, he's not even close this time. In the West, as in the rest of the country, one of the stories we'll be watching tonight is just how long Ronald Reagan's coattails are. There's one state at least, one Senate race at least, where they do not seem to be that long. That is in California, Ronald Reagan's home state, where Alan Cranston, the number 2 leader in the Senate, he's the Senate whip, according to our exit poll, appears to be winning re-election there against Paul Gant. Walter, one last thing. People always wonder just what effect are reporting all these wins for Ronald Reagan around the rest of the country affects voting in the West. In 5 of the last 6 presidential elections, the West as a whole, and California particularly, the largest state out there, has given the winner a lower percentage than the nation as a whole. So it does not appear that our telling voters how it's going leads to a bandwagon effect for the winner.
As a matter of fact, you know, CBS News is concerned about that. When we first had computers back in 1952, we didn't even call them computers, we called them electric brains in those days. But when we first tried it in 1952, there was a lot of concern on the part of CBS. And we did very extensive surveys in the West and determined that was the case, that it didn't make a difference. It shouldn't make a difference to people because, after all, there are all the other races to be decided besides the presidential race. And besides, you want your state to count in the presidential race, and it still does count a great deal, despite what it looks like in the rest of the country. But there are all the legislatures up. 42 state legislatures are up this year. 43 state legislatures are up. And that's a very important matter. There's something like 7,500 legislative seats across the country, and those legislatures are going to redistrict their states on the basis of the 1980 census, and on that basis can, by a little process called gerrymandering, drawing those district lines the way they want to, solidify their states, Republican or Democrat, for the next 10 years, or help do that. Depending on, of course, national trends, but it will help. And then on the ballot are all these propositions in all these states for raising taxes or lowering taxes, putting a limit on taxes. I think there's 15 states that have tax propositions up before them.
You know, Walter, the Republicans in the West, at least, poured a lot more money into these state legislature races than the Democrats did, foreseeing this.
All over the country. The Democrats did nothing in the legislative races, and it was absolutely dumbfounded the political experts as to why they didn't. The Republicans poured millions of dollars into legislative races. They targeted them right where they thought they could get a majority in a state legislature to redistrict in the future. Very smart of them. In West Virginia, the gubernatorial race has been decided. Jay Rockefeller, according to our CBS News estimate, that's John D. Rockefeller IV, has been reelected governor in West Virginia, turning back a challenge from Arch Moore, who defeated him in 1972 when Jay Rockefeller made his first bid for the governorship. Back in '76, however, when Moore was not running, Rockefeller got into the governorship, and now Rockefeller has won a second term in what was said to be the most expensive race in the country. He spent $10.5 million, we're told, on winning that governorship race. CBS News Election Night coverage will continue in a moment. President Carter, with defeat imminent, is arriving now at Democratic campaign headquarters at the Washington Sheraton Hotel. Bob Shackney is there. Bob?
Walter, the president's motorcade is just pulling up at the front door. Greeting him outside, you can't quite see him yet, is Democratic National Chairman Strauss, Jesse Jackson, other dignitaries. The president is going to make his way into the hotel, go to the ballroom where we expect he will be addressing this not very happy crowd. The president's motorcade is being preceded by police cars. Now we hear applause from outside. We can see the flashing light. The crowd's in front of me, Walter, so I can't tell. This crowd is applauding Jimmy Carter. Security men are now walking in. In the distance, I can see dignitaries at the president's car, and he should be coming out in just a moment. He is out of his car. We hear the cheers, and I can just catch the slightest glimpse of the president in this very difficult night coming to his party's election night headquarters with what is obviously bad news. Preceding the president is appointment secretary Phil Wise has just walked in. Security people are walking in, and here comes President Carter, accompanied by National Chairman Robert Strauss, Jesse Jackson. Crowd is cheering. Most of the people can't see the president yet. He's in the doorway. At the moment, I can't see him, Walter.
Bob?
Yes, Walter.
While we're waiting there for him to appear, we just saw Ham Jordan in the corner of the picture there.
Yes,
Chief of
he's
Staff,
just walked in.
Strauss.
Ham Jordan just walked
there,
in.
we can see his picture now.
And here is President Carter, smiling. Mr. President? The president is shaking hands. He's not saying anything to those of us who've been waiting. He is walking through the corridor of the hotel, and he is heading toward the ballroom where his followers have gathered. He should be there in a few moments, and Phil Jones is there.
Bob, here in the ballroom, there are a few hundred people who have gathered waiting to see the president. The crowd, frankly, wouldn't be as large as it is if it weren't for a defense contractors convention that is being held here in the hotel at the time. And many of these people who were attending this convention decided to come in here and take a look and see what is happening. There has been very little going on here all evening, as you can imagine. People gathered around the 4 projectors around this ballroom that carried the results, and of course all the news coming in was bad news. The only thing that occurred about 15 or 20 minutes ago, a fellow by the name of John Maddox, who is just a loyal Carter supporter, went up to the microphone and said that don't be disappointed because 4 years from now, everybody in the country is going to be talking about what a good president Jimmy Carter was. And
Phil?
at that point, there was just a little applause.
Phil Jones? Phil?
Yes.
This is Cronkite back at our headquarters here. We might point out for those who maybe missed it earlier tonight that we did have a report from the White House, from the Associated Press there, as a matter of fact, that President Carter had indicated that President Carter had wanted to concede quite early, but that Jody Powell, his news secretary, had suggested he wait a while. And we just had a report from Terry Drinkwater, a Reagan source out in California, where Reagan is watching these returns, has said that President Carter has called Ronald Reagan, that he chatted briefly with him and implied, apparently, a concession. Although implied was the underlined word in that report from the Reagan source. What that means exactly, I don't know. It seemed to me you either concede or you don't concede. How you apply one may be a pretty tricky bit of semantics. And while we're waiting here, Colorado, according to our CBS News estimate, has gone to Reagan as it is expected it would. The big question in Colorado is going to be whether moderate liberal Senator Gary Hart, one-time campaign manager for George McGovern, will go the route of George McGovern tonight, which was the route to defeat. George McGovern was defeated in South Dakota and will not be returned to the Senate. James Abner, the Republican, won there. Gary Hart was in a very close race with Mary Estelle Buchanan in Colorado, and perhaps a wide lead by Reagan there will spell great difficulty for Mr. Hart. Phil?
Walter, you hear now the Henry Devron Orchestra that has been playing here all evening. Talking to Mr. Devron before tonight's event started, he said that his first political event was a happy one. In 1948, he played at one of the inaugural balls for President Harry Truman. Throughout the evening, we have found a few of the White House, Carter White House staff people who have come by. They were hoping to have a big victory celebration here, but obviously it hasn't turned out that way. For the most part, they're taking it as well as could be expected, saying that obviously they've had better nights on election than they're having here.
A little earlier, Phil. John White, the Democratic National Committee chairman, this afternoon, before these returns piled up, although after Pat Caddell, the pollster, had apparently told President Carter and the official family and Bob Strauss and all of them that the president was going to lose tonight. Well, after that, John White said, if you lose by 1 or 2 points, you can always second guess. But when it's by a huge margin, you just never look back. That's the way I felt about McGovern. The country just wasn't ready. He's talking about McGovern's 72 presidential race, of course. The people didn't want to hear what we were trying to say, according to White, about that 72 race. He thinks that people weren't actually voting for Reagan or against Carter. He said they're just unhappy about the economy and the U.S. stature in the world. But, of course, they apparently blame that on Jimmy Carter.
You know, many of the people here tonight, Walter, were really not that surprised at the result, but they were shocked at least the margin that it appears that Governor Reagan is coming out with. And I think generally a feeling from the president's supporters of disappointment. For some reason, they feel that the president just didn't get all the credit for the many things that he had done, and they feel that this is unfortunate for him. But on the whole, I think that we're not at all surprised. They just feel a little cheated. There you can see Jody Powell standing by now as everybody is waiting for the president to arrive in the ballroom here. There's his congressional liaison director, Frank Moore. Mr. Moore, who was taken off the campaign during the last few days because of an interview he had given indicating that the Ayatollah was dying of cancer. And now the president, first family, is arriving, and our White House correspondent, Jed Duvall, is down in the crowd. Jed?
Thank you, Phil. A number of these dignitaries went out this door in the other direction, presumably to shake the president's hand. And as the Secretary of State goes by, and John White, you can figure the president is not far behind. And, you know, Phil, I've been listening to you and standing down here in this crowd. I haven't seen anybody weeping down here. Now, a few of the White House aides who are coming in look a little teary-eyed, but it's a noisy and rather happy group. And as I look over at the door, there's Hamilton Jordan going up on the stage. But I haven't seen the president come through the crowd yet.
Jed, we saw on the going up the platform
I see Caddell just inside the door, Walter, and there's Dr. Peter Bourne, who was a very, very early Carter advisor in Georgia. There's Bob Strauss.
Jed, hello, Jed, do you hear me? Jed Duvall, can you hear me?
I hear you.
We see Ham Jordan there, of course, now. I was going to say a moment ago, and there's Pat Caddell, the president's political pollster, is the one who apparently had to deliver the bad news this afternoon or last night to the president that he was not going to win this election. It was early this morning, I gather, on the plane was away from Washington to Plains, Georgia. We saw Secretary of State Muskie up there on the platform, too. One of the big questions right now will be, with this sweeping Reagan victory that's in the making tonight, whether or not the president takes him into his counsels on how to deal with the hostage situation in Iran, since almost anything we do in that hostage crisis is going to impinge very heavily upon our foreign policy in the future in that very hot corner of the world. It would seem that the Republicans will want to have some input into what that policy will be.
Walter, just about all of the people who are the closest to Mr. Carter in this administration have come through this door, and it's touching to see a lot of people bravely holding back tears and clapping along to the Democratic Party traditional Happy Days Are Here Again song.
We're seeing Jesse Jackson, the black activist leader from Chicago, who's been very strong with his PUSH program, which is trying to tell the black youth of this country that education is the way to the future balance for them in the nation's affairs. He has been working hard for President Carter.
I think the president is right inside that door, Walter. And I think it's coming through right now. No, they closed the door. Sorry.
They're clearly getting ready here for the president's appearance and what is roundly expected to be his concession statement. The big question for President Carter now is whether or not he will be able to escape going down to
the music,
defeat.
Walter, and the president will be cued shortly.
President of the United States and Mrs. Carter.
Not too much. 2 or 3 feet between me and the table. See if you can get them. Right at your feet. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, not only the president, but the splendid president of these United States.
I promised you 4 years ago that I would never lie to you, so I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt. The people of the United States have made their choice, and of course I accept that decision, but I have to admit not with the same enthusiasm that I accepted the decision 4 years ago. I might say I have a deep appreciation of the system, however, that lets people make the free choice about who will lead them for the next 4 years. About an hour ago, I called Governor Reagan in California, and I told him that I congratulated him for a fine victory. I look forward to working closely with him during the next few weeks We'll have a very fine transition period. I told him I wanted the best one in history. And I then sent him this telegram, and I'll read it to you. It's now apparent that the American people have chosen you as the next president. I congratulate you and pledge to you our fullest support and cooperation in bringing about an orderly transition of government in the weeks ahead. My best wishes are with you and your family as you undertake the responsibilities that lie before you. And I signed it, Jimmy Carter. I have been blessed, as only a few people ever have, to help shape the destiny of this nation. In that effort, I've had your faithful support. In some ways, I've been the most fortunate of all presidents because I've had the daily aid of a wise man and a good man at my side. In my judgment, the best vice president anybody ever had, Fitz Mandel. I've not achieved all I set out to do. Perhaps no one ever does. But we have faced the tough issues. We've stood for and we've fought for and we have achieved some very important goals for our country. These efforts will not end with this administration. The effort must go on, nor will the progress that we have made be lost when we leave office. The great principles that have guided this nation since its very founding will continue to guide America through the challenges of the future. This has been a long and hard-fought campaign, as you well know, but we must now come together as a united and a unified people to solve the problems that are still before us, to meet the challenges of a new decade. And I urge all of you to join in with me in a sincere and fruitful effort to support my successor when he undertakes this great responsibility as president of the greatest nation on earth. Ours is a special country because our vast economic and military strength give us a special responsibility for seeking solutions to the problems that confront the world. But our influence will always be greater when we live up to those principles of freedom, of justice, of human rights for all people. God has been good to me, and God has been good to this country, and I'm truly thankful. I'm thankful for having been able to serve you in this capacity, thankful for the successes that we have had, thankful that to the end you were with me in every good thing that I tried to do. There's an old Yiddish proverb that I've often thought of in the days and months that I've held this office. It says simply, God gives burdens, also shoulders. In all the days and months when I have served you and served this country, you've readily given me your shoulders, your faith, and your prayers. No man could ask any more of his friends. I've wanted to serve as president because I love this country and because I love the people of this nation. Just one more word. Finally, let me say that I am disappointed tonight, but I have not lost either love. Thank you very much.
So, Jimmy Carter, the defeated president, shakes hands with some of his well-wishers as he leaves the hotel ballroom in Washington, presumably to return to the White House. Even as he was giving his concession statement tonight, he did win 2 more states, according to our CBS News estimate. He took Minnesota, the state, the only state outside of Georgia, giving him a 2-digit electoral number. 10 electoral votes go to him from Minnesota, and West Virginia has also gone for Jimmy Carter. So he has now won 4 states and the District of Columbia for a total of 35 electoral votes. But even as those votes were being tallied for Carter, the next president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, apparently was winning 3 more states, according to our CBS News estimate. He is taking Delaware, Vermont, and Wyoming. So the electoral count now looks like 35 for Carter and some 238 for Ronald Reagan. As you can see, Ronald Reagan very close to the 270 he needs. As I was saying, just as the president walked into that room in the Washington Hotel, what he would hope for now, it would seem, is that his defeat will not be as bad as that which plagued Barry Goldwater back in 1964. And now Mondale is speaking there in Washington. Let's listen to him, the Vice President.
Reagan on his victory. I join the President in extending to Mr. Reagan and Mr. Bush and their families our congratulations. Now we must stand together behind our President-elect, all of us. We have only one President. He deserves our support, and he will have it. Obviously, I would rather have one. But I also see, as I think you do, a chance to rejoice. For we are, above all, thank God, privileged to live in a democracy. Today, all across this nation, in high school cafeterias, in town halls, in churches and synagogues, the American people quietly wielded their staggering power and peacefully, without intimidation, made their choice. And whatever the outcome, tonight we celebrate above all the process we call American freedom. These last 4 years, and with your help, the American people have conferred on me the highest privilege I've ever held, a higher office than I ever expected to hold, and I am deeply honored to have served as Vice President of the United States. I especially want to thank President Carter and Rosalind for their kindness to me and to Joan and to our family. This kind and good man, this president, has permitted me to work more closely with him than any vice president in American history, and I thank him profoundly for that experience. I have no regrets, for I've learned in this office, as I could in no other way, about our country's richness and our world's promise. I've been moved by the majesty of our continent, lifted by the strength of our people, buoyed by the gift of their wit, touched by the decency of their spirit, and stretched by the reach of their hope. And tonight I want to thank everyone here and people all across the nation for the support that you've given us. And above all, I want to thank the people of Minnesota for their magnificent and continuing trust and friendship. It is
the people of Minnesota's trust and friendship in Walter Fritz Mondale, Vice President of the United States, that very possibly put that state into Jimmy Carter Mondale's column tonight. The Minnesota, according to our CBS News estimate, has gone one of 4 states and the District of Columbia that have gone to Jimmy Carter tonight. Incidentally, he was speaking from St. Paul, not Washington, as I think I said earlier. In Los Angeles, Reagan campaign director William Casey watched President Carter's concession speech tonight, and Mr. Casey is with Jerry Bowen right now. Jerry?
Well, Walter, Bill Casey has seen a great deal with the Reagan campaign. He came on board in New Hampshire when it was in financial trouble, and he has seen it now reach the ultimate success, the White House. You did see President Carter's concession statement and Vice President Mondale's concession statement. Your reaction to those statements first, Mr. Casey.
Jerry, certainly President Carter and Vice President Mondale made gracious and generous concession statements which were in the best tradition, best American political tradition. And I'm confident that we're seeing here tonight, and we'll see in the weeks ahead, one of the glories of the American political system in which the people speak on Election Day, express their mandate, and then both parties cooperate to work out the concession and implement that mandate over the weeks and months ahead.
President Carter said the transition would be one of the best in American history, that President-elect Reagan and President Carter would work closely together. What is going to be the agenda for that transition? What have you worked out in the meetings that were held here in Los Angeles today?
Well, we're having meetings during the week to develop our transition team, and we will shortly be in touch with the officials designated by President Carter to implement the transition from their standpoint. That will be one of the main orders of business over the balance of this week.
We were told last night, Mr. Casey, that you folks knew from your own polls that you were going to win by 12%. At least that was your projection, but nobody could believe that kind of margin, and so conservative estimates were given to the press. Are you as stunned and surprised by this electoral landslide as everyone else?
As a matter of fact, Jerry, I'm not. I have been very bullish about the outcome here. I believed our polls would show us winning very, very strongly by maybe 10 or 11 points. I don't know what the final outcome is going to be, but I have felt in my bones and on the basis of my experience in some of the eastern states that we would win. New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, which were questionable in our calculations. So I'm not that much surprised by the magnitude of our victory.
Bill Casey, a national campaign manager, thank you very much. Walter?
Thank you, Jerry, and Mr. Casey. Thank you very much. The question, of course, is going to be now for Jimmy Carter, the first Democrat seeking re-election for a full second term to be defeated in 92 years. The question is for him, what is he going to do after he leaves the White House? And we heard, according to Reuters tonight, that his mother says that she wants him to come back to Plains, Georgia, cut the grass, and clean up the yard. His Baptist minister in Washington a couple of years ago was quoted as saying that the president had told him that he'd like to enter the Baptist missionary work when he left the White House. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have more CBS News election night coverage in a moment.
Here again is Walter Cronkite.
We're just able to say with our CBS News estimate that Ronald Reagan has won Wisconsin, which was a state expected to go to Carter. 11 electoral votes gives him 265 electoral votes, just 5 electoral votes short of the 270 needed to become the next president. He's arriving at his victory celebration at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles right now. Jerry Bowen and Bill Plant are there. Gentlemen.
Del, we don't know whether he's coming here right away or going upstairs to meet some of his close friends and supporters.
There was the original game plan, as Bill said, was to go upstairs, but so he could await the victory results. And since that's happened rather prematurely and for a landslide, there are a number of indications that he'll come here, greet the crowd that's now boogieing to the Reagan victory beat, and then he'll go upstairs and meet his longtime friends and supporters.
I don't know if you can see what's going on here or if you can hear it, but this ballroom is just packed with Ronald Reagan supporters who were let in here about a half hour ago, and they seem bent on having a good time.
Gentlemen. Gentlemen.
Walter,
yes,
we hear you.
Yeah, hi. Did you hear anything more about the Carter phone call to Reagan, what they said back and forth? Did you get any news on that?
Well, we haven't heard, Walter, exactly what was said. We know that the call came before Governor Reagan left his home in Pacific Palisades, about 8:30 your time, or 8:35. Came to Governor Reagan just about 2 minutes after Representative Anderson's phone call came. Both calls before he left for dinner, and he's running a little bit behind schedule right now.
He may be running.
What they said.
He may be running behind schedule as far as his appearances out there at the hotel go, but he's certainly running way ahead of schedule of the incoming votes tonight. As you can see, 275 electoral votes now. He needed 270 to win. It was Louisiana, according to our CBS News count of the states, that put him over the top. Louisiana's electoral votes, 10 electoral votes added to the 265 he had before. That's a total of some 26 states he has now won. 27 with Louisiana now, and 275 electoral votes to merely 35 electoral votes for Jimmy Carter. With a lot of states still outstanding, of course, Mr. Carter's numbers could increase considerably, but there's no way now, according to our CBS News estimates, he can overtake Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan will become the next president of the United States. Those people celebrating out there in California can celebrate on a double count. He's the first resident of California ever to win a first term as president of the United States. Richard Nixon when he won his first term as president in 1968, was officially listed as a resident of New York City. And not until 1972, on his second term, did he list himself as a resident of California. So Ronald Reagan goes into the Guinness Book of Records, as long as, and all other reference books, I suppose now, but in the Guinness Book, at any rate, the first Californian elected into his first term in the presidency. Hiram Johnson thought he'd won it at one time, but as we know, he woke up the next morning to find he hadn't. By the way, he's also the first native son of Illinois to be elected president, and that one gets a lot of people. They think that Lincoln was. Well, Lincoln was a native of Kentucky, not of Illinois. So he's got a couple of firsts on his record there.
Walter, we expect to see him here pretty shortly. We'll keep you informed.
All right. We'll come back to you as soon as we get some action from you out there at the hotel in Los Angeles. We can now say that Utah also is in Ronald Reagan's column, boosting his electoral count even more. The big thing that President Carter, I'm sure, would hope for now is that he does not go down to electoral defeat as one of the worst defeats in our history. He would like, certainly, I know, to beat Barry Goldwater's poor record in 1964, when Goldwater won just 6 states and 52 electoral votes. So far, Carter has won 5 states and the District of Columbia for his total of 35 electoral votes. CBS News Election Night coverage will continue in a moment. Back here at our CBS News election headquarters, where another one of the liberal senators, Democrats, targeted by the conservative groups for defeat, has now, according to our CBS News estimate, gone down to defeat, the third of that 6-member group, and that is Senator John Culver of Iowa, having lost to Charles Grassley, the Republican candidate for that seat from Iowa. The others who lost were Birch Bayh in Indiana and George McGovern in South Dakota. Dan Rather can tell us something about the Culver loss, I'm sure.
Walter, granted that it looks like a tidal wave for Ronald Reagan. What we're dealing with here, though, is possibly changing the whole complexion of the United States Senate, possibly doing so. All of the liberal Democratic senators in the Midwest, all of the one up tonight whose races have been decided, have lost. Bayh, Culver, McGovern. The only race yet to be decided in that category, Gaylord Nelson in Wisconsin, who is battling for his political life. Some of our sample precincts are reporting in Wisconsin, but not enough yet to indicate any trend there other than a very close race. Now, it's one thing to say that the Republicans might win control of the United States Senate, but everyone should keep in mind that what has happened in the Midwest tonight is not just simply Republicans replacing liberal Democrats, but Republicans clearly to the right side of the political spectrum. So you could be talking about here tonight, Walter, depending on how the Gaylord Nelson race turns out and some other races, such as the one in Colorado and other places, not just a change in the party leadership of the United States Senate, but a more significant shift. I realize that George McGovern is up at the moment.
We do have George McGovern speaking out in South Dakota. Let's listen.
To serve the people of South Dakota for so many years, and I thank them for their patience with me and their tolerance of ideas that frequently were not in popular favor. I leave the United States Senate and the service of South Dakota with very deep personal satisfaction and with no regrets at all for the battles that we have fought over the past 18 years. The greatest satisfactions of my public life were the efforts we made to defend the family farmer, to nourish the hungry, and to help the country find the ways that make for peace. Important in that was the effort some years ago to bring an end to the tragedy in Vietnam. It was my... highest privilege while representing the people of South Dakota to also be nominated for the presidency of the United States.
That was George McGovern, the three-term senator. He's been in the Senate for 18 years. At 58 years old, he was defeated finally in South Dakota after a couple of very close races before. He's always had a tough race. This time, he went down in the great Reagan Republican sweep of 1980 to James Abner, a four-term congressman, a very popular man in South Dakota, and will now be the new senator from that state. Abner is 57 years old. We'll have more CBS News Election Night coverage in a moment.
That was supposed to be very close and is, according to the CBS estimate, extremely tight. You can see that Mary Ethel Buchanan, the Republican, is slightly ahead of Gary Hart, who was perceived or painted by his opponent as a liberal in Washington who came back to the state and tried to appear to be conservative. This may be another state where Reagan's just swamping in the presidential race may overwhelm Gary Hart. In Idaho, according to the CBS estimate, Stephen Sims, the conservative Republican congressman, is leading over the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Frank Church. Let me just tell you what the presidential numbers are. According to the CBS estimate, Ronald Reagan is beating Jimmy Carter in Idaho by 75-20. So if Frank Church wins in that race, that'll be quite an accomplishment. One of the big issues there, if you can believe it, is the Panama Canal. It's a burning issue in Idaho. Frank Church led the fight against for the Panama Canal treaties, despite the fact that 94% of the state was against the treaties. In Utah, CBS News is estimating that Jake Garn has won the state of Utah. That is really not because Ronald Reagan is popular. It's because Jake Garn is popular. He is as conservative as Ronald Reagan. He beat Dan Berman, former state Democratic Party chairman, executive, I think he was, executive director of the party there. Lastly, let's look at Washington State, where the polls have just closed. This is another big Democratic Senate chairman. He's Warren Magnuson, the Democrat chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, in a tight race against the Republican Attorney General Slade Gordon, with only 1% of the vote in. It's a very close race out there, and we may be up watching this race, Gary Hart race, and possibly even the Frank Church race late into the evening. And despite what Harry says, this may be the region that decides whether the Republicans overtake the Senate this year.
So I've been keeping tabs on these reports of all of yours, and I get it as 9 races with incumbent Democrats where Republicans are now leading, some of those without many returns in yet. 9 where they're leading. The Republicans have already taken 4 seats from the Democrats. It could be possible tonight that on the Reagan coattails and with this conservative tide across the country, 13 seats will be won by the Democrats, the largest in modern times in the Senate in a single race, turning the control of the United States Senate handily over to the Republicans. And furthermore, every one of those Republican senators is more conservative than the Democrats they are ousting, some considerably more conservative, some far to the right compared to where the Democrats they have driven out of office have been or are driving out of office if all of this turns out. Now, all of these races may not go the way they're indicated right now, but that's what would appear to be the situation at the moment. In the state of Missouri, we just had a gubernatorial call there. It was expected to be a close race in a rematch, a rematch there between Christopher Bond and the present governor, Joseph Teasdale. Teasdale ousted Bond a couple of years ago, and now Bond came back this year, and according to our CBS News estimate, has won the state house at Jefferson City for the Republicans. So we've got a Senate that looks like it could very well tonight go conservative and Republican by a very considerable margin. The first time either house of the Congress has been in Republican hands since 53, 54, on the heels of the Eisenhower victory in 1952. And in the gubernatorial races, there are also some switches that are possibly going to take place tonight in the 13 races there. In the House of Representatives, as we reported to you earlier, we now have refined our estimate somewhat in the House that the new House will have 250 Democrats, 184 Republicans, which represents a loss of around 25 to 28 seats. That estimate of ours isn't absolutely firm, give or take 7 seats, but it indicates an improvement on the conservative Republican side in the House of Representatives, although the Democrats, of course, with those figures, retain control. Bruce Morton has been looking at the comparison between the Reagan 1980 landslide and the 1972 one put together by Richard Nixon, his fellow Californian. Bruce, come in.
Walter, as you said, the last presidential massacre was in 1972, and the victim, of course, was George McGovern, a Senate loser tonight, who then got just 38% of the vote. We don't know yet what percentage President Carter will end up with, but at the moment it's not very different from McGovern's. Our exit poll shows him with just over 40% in a three-way race, of course. And our poll shows some other similarities to 1972. Then McGovern got just over 48% of the Union vote. Now Carter is doing only a little better. He has about half the Union vote. The two run about the same with Catholics and so on. Defections, in other words, among traditionally Democratic groups. In 1972, though, McGovern's defeat was not a disaster for the Democratic Party. Richard Nixon did not have, to use the old phrase, long coattails. Ronald Reagan's coattail size is still open to question, but certainly, as that regional whip around a couple of minutes showed, the Republicans are making serious Senate gains. As for the House, we asked people in our poll today how they voted for Congress. Those poll figures don't mean anything in terms of who'll win a particular district, but overall, a lot more people today said they were voting Republican for Congress than did 4 years ago. And they don't seem to be doing any more ticket splitting than they did 4 years ago. So what that suggests, as our House estimate suggests, is that the Republicans may make sizable gains in the Congress tonight. Walter?
Earlier this evening, Phil Jones in Washington talked with President Carter's campaign manager and former chief of staff at the White House, Hamilton Jordan.
The presidency of this country is a very difficult job. I don't want to talk tonight, which should be a night of victory for Governor Reagan. I don't want to make a lot of alibis or excuses, but it is a difficult job. We, I think, have made tough decisions. We have not sidestepped issues the last 4 years. Some of those decisions were politically controversial. There have been things that have happened around the world, such as the OPEC price increases, which had a devastating effect on our economy here at home. And we have still tonight a tragic situation in Iran where 52 Americans are being held hostage. So a number of these things came together in the last few days of the campaign, and then the tide turned against us. We had an independent candidate running. Many of those people, if he had not been in the race, would have supported the president. So it's a confluence of political and substantive things, plus an effective campaign by Governor Reagan in addressing the issues in a way that appeal to the American people.
With the victory just barely in hand, but a sizable victory that it is, the Reagan campaign forces, and now the transition force becomes that, is already beginning to put back together some of the loose ends that came apart in the last part of the campaign. At least according to Reuters, William Casey, who is the Reagan campaign chief, is saying tonight that Richard Allen, the foreign affairs advisor to Reagan, who withdrew a week ago because of charges of financial impropriety when he was in the Nixon administration, has rejoined, as of tonight, the Reagan staff. Allen has been mentioned as possibly the national security advisor in the Reagan administration. That would be the job now held under Carter by Zbigniew Brzezinski. As we've been reporting throughout the evening, it is a Reagan landslide tonight. He has won 279 electoral votes, according to our CBS News estimate, as you see on our board there. And Jimmy Carter has won just 35 electoral votes so far. And all of those big western states are yet to be heard from, or a lot of them are. Bill Moyers has a few words to tell us about one-term presidents. Bill?
Walter, listening to Hamilton Jordan a minute ago, I was reminded of something Mr. Jordan said to the staff at the Democratic National Committee not long after Jimmy Carter had been elected in 1976. Said Hamilton Jordan, after one term as governor of Georgia, Jimmy couldn't have been reelected in Georgia for a second term. Maybe he'll wind up that way in 1980. Well, he has. And while his defeat says a lot about the way Jimmy Carter has run things, it also says a lot about the office itself. It's almost a cliche to point out these days that not since 1960 has a president completed 2 terms in the White House or left office with the affection and esteem of his countrymen. Kennedy, elected and assassinated. Johnson, elected and discredited. Nixon, elected and disgraced. Ford, appointed and defeated. Carter, elected and defeated. It's rare, in fact, that presidents actually do serve 2 terms, Walter. Just look at the period leading up to this century. Hayes elected to the smell of scandal. Garfield assassinated. Arthur denied his party's nomination. Cleveland defeated for re-election by Harrison with a minority of the popular vote. Harrison defeated for re-election by Cleveland. McKinley assassinated. Roosevelt splitting the Republican Party. In fact, 22 of our 39 presidents have been 1-term presidents. The good old days were never as placid as we remember them, Walter, and the presidency is more a target of turbulence than an island of stability. We Americans seem to revere the presidency and despise the men who seek it. During the campaign, we compare them to the noblest models. We compare them to Jefferson's brilliance, to Lincoln's wisdom, to the 2 Roosevelts' energy and charisma, to Kennedy's charm. But once they're elected, we look at them as if they were wanted posters at the post office. Yesterday, Ronald Reagan joined hands with his supporters in California and sang, "God bless America." Better he had sang, "God help me." Walter?
Thank you, Bill. And here is another state for Reagan, one that even the Reagan people themselves had thought they might lose tonight. In the Pacific Northwest, Washington has gone for Ronald Reagan. And also in California, in the Senate race there, where Alan Cranston, a liberal Democratic senator, was one of those targeted by conservatives, he has won his race over Paul Gann, who was one of the authors of Proposition 13, the ceiling on property taxes in California. It set off such a wave of that across the country. Alan Cranston has won. He is the first of the liberal senators targeted by the conservatives who has won a race tonight. Others have lost. Birch Bayh in Indiana, John Culver in Iowa, and George McGovern in South Dakota. Ronald Reagan, as you know, is expected soon at his hotel out there in California to address his group, and we will be going there when the time comes, although they say it is still several minutes away. So at this moment, we have 47% of the national vote in and 50% for Reagan, 43% for Carter, but Reagan leading with a whopping 288 electoral votes to 35 for Carter. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
This portion of Election Night is sponsored by the Bell System, keeping your communication system the best in the world. By Polaroid, inventors of instant photography. And by S-Mark, a family of companies serving the families of America. And now from CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
And the Reagan tide rolls on and on, the tide that will make him the 40th President of the United States come next January 20th. He has won now, according to our CBS News estimate, in 2 more of the western states where he was expected to win, Nevada and in Arizona. Nevada's 3 electoral votes, and those in Arizona now go into the Reagan column. That means that in the in the number of states won, President Carter has still won just 5 states, including the District of Columbia, for a total of now 35 electoral votes. Reagan has won a grand total of 297 electoral votes, all of the states marked in blue there, as you see. 297 to 35. And a very important senatorial race. The Republicans have taken another seat, and this time they have sent into retirement one of the oldest senators in the United States Senate in sense of service, 36 years in the United States Senate, a ranking member of that body, of course, Warren Magnuson, the senator from Washington, has been defeated by the Republican Slade Gorton, according to our CBS News estimate. And here is Ronald Reagan. Let's see if we can listen in. He's in his hotel suite in Los Angeles. I don't think we had audio from that picture anyway. It was a brief shot that they permitted us as he obviously took a congratulatory call from a friend. We assume that that call was not from President Carter. He said he called him some time ago to concede the election and to congratulate him, as did John Anderson, the independent candidate, who incidentally now has a 6% of the votes, with just 50% of the national vote counted. Incidentally, with that 50%, half the nation's vote counted, it's 50% still for Reagan, 43% for Carter, 6% for John Anderson. And for Ed Clark, the Libertarian candidate, just a bare 1% of the vote. That 6% for Anderson, if it holds up all evening through the Western state count, will mean that he will collect federal matching funds and perhaps be able to retire a great portion, if not all, of his presidential campaign debt. Let's go now to those Western states and a report from our Western regional reporter, Leslie Stahl.
Walter, Ronald Reagan is taking the West by storm. Let's look at the recap board and see how well he is doing. We don't have any returns in yet from the state of Alaska, but he is decisively beating Jimmy Carter in Arizona. In Colorado, it's, according to our estimate, 58 for Reagan, 32 for Carter. In Idaho, it's 74 for Reagan, 21 for Carter. Montana, 58 to 35. Reagan is winning has won, according to our estimate, or at least is leading in Nevada. Ronald Reagan has won New Mexico, Utah, Washington, where Carter went just yesterday. According to our estimate, he'll win there with 55 to 36 for Carter, and Reagan in Wyoming, 66 to 28. It's an absolute landslide, just trouncing him. As you said, Walter, Warren Magnuson has gone down to defeat in Washington. Age was the big issue, as it was when Jacob Javits ran in the primary here. His opponent, the man who has won, the Republican, Slade Gorton, the Attorney General, raised the age issue very subtly in his ads by jogging and bicycling, never really hitting it straight on. But that and the Reagan landslide in Washington has gone to defeat the senior member of the Senate, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who, by the way, brought the state $1 billion in relief aid for the victims of Mount St. Helens, but that was not enough to convince the voters of Washington to return him to the Senate. He's been in Congress for 44 years, Walter.
Leslie, can you make any suggestion as to what the percentage of vote Reagan is getting over Carter in the West? Because we've got, with 50% of the vote counted, popular vote is now 50% only for Reagan, and clearly the West is going to
It's much more than that. It's 2 to 1 in the West, generally speaking, but we don't have California in yet, and that is about half the West. The interesting thing to watch in the West is that McGovern lost the West with 39% of the vote. And with the states we have so far, Jimmy Carter's defeat could be greater, but it really is difficult to say without the California returns.
At any rate, we can be quite certain that when all of your states are in from the West, we're going to see a much higher percentage of the national vote for Ronald Reagan. This isn't going to be one of those cases which we've had in the past history where a man wins the presidency with just a bare majority of the votes and sometimes even not a majority of the votes. That has happened in our history 4 times in this century, as a matter of fact, but it's not likely to happen this time with this huge electoral landslide of Ronald Reagan's. CBS News coverage of the presidential election and all the state races will continue in a moment. According to our CBS News estimate, another state for Reagan, Oregon, has fallen into his long list of states he's won tonight. That was another one that even the Republicans had thought maybe the Democrats would take tonight. Well, they didn't. Reagan has made a clean sweep now of all of the western states that we have been able to count so far. Everything west of the Mississippi except Minnesota has gone for Reagan on our count. Let's get an update now from Bill Plant at the Century Plaza Hotel on what's happened to Governor Reagan. We thought we'd be down there amongst you by now, Bill.
Walter, we're expecting Governor Reagan in about 20-25 minutes, but we know that earlier you saw some pictures of Governor Reagan up in his suite. Some of us were up there then, and I can tell you that he is absolutely overjoyed. He's talking on the telephone to people around the country, and we heard him say to Governor William Clements of Texas that I feel just great. This is just unbelievable, isn't it? And it's plain that not only Ronald Reagan, but also Nancy Reagan feels that way. She told us that she was relieved. She also said that she'd be happy to get some sleep. Reagan's pollster, Richard Worthman, now projects that they'll probably get more than 400 electoral votes. They had said about 390, as you heard earlier before. I think now it'll go over the 400 mark. The governor's been working on his speech, the one that he'll give down here when he comes in.
Bill,
Yeah,
let me interrupt you. California, according to the CBS News estimate, has gone for Ronald Reagan. I don't think anybody really expected otherwise. Even President Carter didn't make a last-minute campaign appearance there despite his earlier plans. But that state is in the Reagan camp now, and that puts his electoral count up there, 348 now. Go ahead, Bill.
Walter, the electoral count at 348 and still climbing is pretty much what the Reagan strategists expect. We were telling you that up in his suite, Governor Reagan was calling people around the country. We know that he talked to Senator Paul Laxalt, his close friend and the nominal manager of his campaign. They're very close. He talked to Governor Jim Rhodes of Ohio, somebody who's been with him frequently on the campaign trail, making all of those courtesy calls that, you know, a politician will make either in defeat or victory. We learned a little bit, too, Walter, about what Governor Reagan talked to the president about. He described it as a very, very nice offer from the president to aid in the transition. He said that he had accepted that because he wanted a smooth transition as well. So it's quite plain that they are absolutely delighted, and we expect to see them down here, Walter, very shortly.
Bill, have you heard anything about who will head up his transition team? We heard it might be James Baker, who came to him somewhat reluctantly from the George Bush campaigns.
Walter, we understand that that decision has not been made yet. It was due to be made at a noon lunch of the senior staff today. It wasn't made. We're not quite sure why, but we expect that it will be made tomorrow. Names that come up include that of Jim Baker, as you mentioned, Ed Meese, who is the governor's chief of staff, and who will certainly have some major role in a Reagan administration. And, of course, there's Michael Deaver, who is very close, the governor's closest personal aide. We'll hear that tomorrow, we think.
Bill, we also had a report that was carried on Reuters tonight that Bill Casey, the campaign chief, had said that Richard Allen, as of tonight, is back on the Reagan staff. Is there any significance in that?
Well, it wasn't clear to us whether he was going to stay off the staff or not. They were fairly frank in admitting that they didn't want that as a problem in the last few days of the campaign. They didn't want that to be ammunition for the Carter camp. So Mr. Allen voluntarily took himself off, and of course, if he hadn't done it voluntarily, they would have done it for him. He is back. He's wearing his staff pin, and we expect that he will be part of the transition team. His specialty, as you know, is foreign affairs.
Thank you very much, Bill. We'll be talking more with you later on tonight, certainly, and we'll be waiting to hear from Ronald Reagan when he appears there with his victory statement to his supporters at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. CBS News Election Night coverage will continue in a moment.
I'm really, pleased to begin with because an awful lot of people worked very, very hard. I believe our party was more unified. We had better organization. But I am very surprised with the magnitude of the electoral vote that I thought would be very close, with so many states, according to the polls, relatively close. My general impression is that the momentum away from a narrow electoral victory for Reagan began at the time of the debate. That momentum began to build
economic figures came out that weren't very encouraging to President Carter. I believe the impasse that developed over the weekend in the hostage situation probably, on balance, was adverse to President Carter. So a lot of things all sort of culminated at a wrong time from President Carter's point of view. And Governor Reagan, fortunately, made no mistakes that I think were serious. And with the party unity and party effort, this is what happened.
You know, you're one of the very rare experts at transition. Having had
I've gone through it.
You've gone through it. What do you see as the problems? And this is a rather a big transition this time. It may be that he'll carry the Senate with him, for instance. He'll have an opportunity to work with the legislature that at least is half on his side, at least by party credentials. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, you've got a combination of things that are somewhat different from what they were when I left the White House and President Carter took over. We have a lame duck session of the Congress coming up, I think, on the 10th of November, which is just a few days away. There is a great deal of unfinished business that the Congress has on its platter. They haven't yet passed the budget for the fiscal year that started October 1st. And so they not only have the budget problems, but other undone legislation.
Will that lame duck Congress listen to the people's voice as expressed through this conservative victory across the country and react accordingly?
Walter, I think they would be very, very foolish if this lame duck Congress, which is more liberal than the one that was elected today, if they try to ram through some legislation that would be contrary to what is the public sentiment expressed on November 4th, there would be a lot of unhappiness among many, many millions of Americans. So my best judgment is that this Congress, in the days they are in session before Thanksgiving, will probably do the routine things, finish the budget and a few other items, but then call it quits.
What about the matter of the hostages now and the entire arrangements we must make with Tehran? Clearly, almost any deal that the president makes with Tehran is going to have a long-range effect on our Middle Eastern policy in the critical area of the Persian Gulf. Can the incoming president have an input to that policy, or do you see that as outside the possibility?
As I flew from California today, and I left California about 2 o'clock and got to New York just three-quarters of an hour ago, I thought about the question that you've asked. I haven't called President Carter. I tried to call Governor Reagan, and he was on his way to, I think, the Century Plaza. So what I say is totally on my own. It seems to me that the hostage problem is now out of the political arena, period. It is a question that ought to be approached from a unity point of view. I would suggest that President Carter bring in Governor Reagan, his advisors. I believe President Carter ought to bring in the Democratic and Republican leaders of the Senate, the House, and try to have a united front and a determination on behalf of all of us, regardless of political faith, to try and negotiate and to recover the hostages. Whether that's practical or not, I can't tell you, but it seems to me what we need right now is unity so that the Ayatollah and the Iranian government, whatever it may be, understands that they can't undercut one element in the United States to achieve something on their behalf.
Would you be willing to offer your services as a transition member of that for that purpose?
If I was asked, Walter, of course. But I think it would have to be a broad front. I just wouldn't want to be one out of many if we had a total unity approach, which would include Governor Reagan, the Democratic Republican leaders, working in conjunction with President Carter. Of course, I would be willing to participate.
What about a permanent role in the Reagan administration?
Walter, I think I told you last summer I didn't want a job. I don't have any ambitions for a job. On the other hand, I'll be anxious to help if Governor Reagan wants me to in any way on a temporary or short-term basis. And he and I have developed a very good relationship, and I expect on maybe one or more occasions he might ask for some advice.
Are you absolutely rejecting a permanent, a cabinet job?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you have any idea who he might pick for defense and Secretary of State?
I have not talked to him about any names. I've been so preoccupied in this campaign that I really haven't had an opportunity to talk with him about personalities. I have some ideas, but I don't think I ought to mention them until I've had a chance to talk to him personally.
Would you urge Henry Kissinger to be back in the cabinet?
Well, Henry's one of my favorites, as you well know, and I think any president would be well advised to take advantage of Henry's experience, his talents, his dedication. But I don't want to prejudice Henry or in any way interfere. So I think I better just not get into personality.
Mr. President, you said you hadn't had a chance to talk to Governor Reagan yet. He's now, as you see, coming into the Century Plaza Ballroom, and we're going to hear from him in a moment. I'll tell you what, if you stick around, we'll see if we can possibly establish communication, and maybe you can have a word with him when he finishes up there.
Fine. I tried to call him, but he was on his way to where he is, I guess.
I know he's going to have a great deal to say to you, sir, but I don't think we've ever seen a former president of the United States go out on the campaign trail quite with the vitality and the all-out commitment that we watched you perform for.
I got a little vigorous out there. Betty gave me a little advice that I ought to calm down a little bit. But, she said it may look good in Detroit, but it doesn't look so good on television.
You're speaking of some of your stronger statements?
I watched one of them, and I had to agree with it. But it sure helped the crowd with a little enthusiasm.
Which one would you look back on with some embarrassment?
Well, I think it was in Peoria when I said Jimmy Carter had blown it. And I said it was some bigger. I think he has, but it didn't look as good on television as it sounded out there.
well, no matter how it sounded, it turned out to be prophetic.
Yeah, well. I think I should have learned the lesson that Teddy Kennedy finally learned with convention hall speeches don't always look as good on television as they may sound in a big auditorium.
By the way, let me ask you one other question while we're watching Governor Reagan and Nancy Reagan and their family waving to the crowd out there. Obvious joy over the smashing victory tonight. John Anderson kind of hinted tonight at the possibility of another run for it. It was just a hint, but and he said there was an enigmatic statement that they had taken the wrong way when they cheered for him. Do you think he would have any role in the Republican Party if he came back to the fold?
If I were in the House of Representatives and wanted to continue to build the party on a broader basis, I would find a place for John.
I would hope that the party...
Excuse me, sir. I think Governor Reagan's about to speak.
Thanks very much. Thank you. You know, here we are. This is... We're all here but one now, and he was here, but they just took him off stage. It's way past his bedtime. But let me just say first of all, this has been, well, there's never been a more humbling moment in my life. I would have been not only humbled by the extent of what has happened tonight, even if it had been the cliffhanger that all of us, I think, were expecting, it would have been the same way, but just to have had the support of the people of this country. I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith. Earlier this evening, I spoke on the phone with President Carter. He called, John Addison called, but the President pledged the utmost in cooperation in the transition that will take place in these coming months. I offered him my own cooperation. He graciously said that he wanted this to be the
Governor Reagan, we just wanted to show you what the map of the United States looks like as of 8 o'clock tonight.
Hey!
It's all yours.
All right. When that began to slide, I thought that maybe the world was going out just as I was getting in. But anyway, as I say, the President was most gracious about this. And now all across America, there are some people that I owe a great debt of thanks to. There they are. They're meeting tonight in our national headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. The National Committee people, the dedicated professionals who made the campaign run, and in every state, in the counties, the cities, and the precincts, to all of them who worked so tirelessly, literally hundreds of thousands of volunteers, and I've seen them at work throughout the country on this campaign. I just owe them an immeasurable debt of thanks. To George and Barbara Bush, our running mates down in Texas, no one has worked harder than they have. We only crossed paths a few times on this campaign and had to go out of our way to do it because their schedule was so heavy. And I can tell you that we're going to have a true partnership and a true friendship in the White House. And now, as I said before, my family. I'm so grateful to them for the love, for the support, and for the hard work, because some of them were out on the campaign trail easily as much as Nancy and I were. And speaking of Nancy, she's going to have a new title in a couple of months. And it isn't really new because she's been the first lady in my life for a long time. Now, we'll share that a little bit in the future. You know, Abe Lincoln, the day after his election to the presidency, gathered in his office the newsmen who had been covering his campaign. And he said to them, well, boys, your troubles are over now. Mine have just begun. I think I know what he meant. Lincoln may have been concerned in the troubled times in which he became president, but I don't think he was afraid. He was ready to confront the problems and the troubles of a still youthful country, determined to seize the historic opportunity to change things. And I am not frightened by what lies ahead, and I don't believe the American people are frightened by what lies ahead. Together, we're going to do what has to be done. We're going to put America back to work again. You know, I aim to try and tap that great American spirit that opened up this completely undeveloped continent from coast to coast and made it a great nation, survived several wars, survived a Great Depression, and we'll survive the problems that we face right now. When I accepted your nomination for president, I hesitatingly, but I asked for your prayers at that moment. I won't ask them for this in particular moment, but I will just say I would be very happy to have them in the days ahead. All I can say to all of you is thank you, and thank you for more than just George Bush and myself. Thank you because if the trend continues, we may very well control one house of the Congress for the first time in a quarter of a century. We have picked up some governorships, and Bill Brock told me on the phone just a few minutes ago that it looks like in a number of states we have turned the state legislatures around, and for the first time they are majorities for us. So, you did it. I have one message that I have to give before I leave. I've been upstairs on the phone trying to get a hold of two celebrations, two parties that are going on, one in Tampico, Illinois, where I was born, and one in Dixon, Illinois, where I grew up. I've got two hometowns. And finally, we managed to get the radio station in that area, and they told us that they would broadcast my message into the two parties that are going on. So to all of them, thank you too, back there in the hometown. Thank you all.
Ronald Reagan was speaking there, he picked up another big state in the Middle West, Illinois. a state that had thought, the pollsters had thought it would be a toss-up state, a close one. He has won it with a very narrow margin, but according to our CBS News estimate, it does go into the Ronald Reagan column, making a total of 34 states he has won so far, to 4 for President Carter, plus the District of Columbia.
Ladies and gentlemen, the new President of the United States, Ronald Reagan!
President Ford has been watching Governor Reagan's statement to his group here tonight with us, and we're sort of hoping that we might be able to establish two-way communication, President Ford, with the next President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. We don't know whether they're going to accomplish that or not. There's an awful crowd around him, as you see, and he's got a lot of people to talk to, a lot of people to thank, but we're still hopeful. That was quite a joyful Ronald Reagan, as you would expect.
I thought he looked very, very well, Walter, and obviously they were exuberant. It's a great victory. He's been at it for more than a couple of years, and this is a culmination of a tremendous effort that deserves the kind of good cheer that they're going through.
I think when we see him there tonight, we could appreciate, as we watch Nancy Reagan there.
How do you feel?
Well, thanking.
Takes a while for it to sink in.
It hasn't sunk in yet?
My husband's calling me.
Well, would you bring him over here to us, Mr. Reagan?
I'll try.
Thank you.
Well, we'll see if we can get the governor and the next president on there. I was going to say, Mr. President, when watching him there tonight, you realize that one of the things, when he got to campaigning this year, that he put to rest very quickly was a matter of age, because of his appearance. I think we're going to get him up to our microphone here. Perhaps we'll have a word with you.
Congratulations, Mr. President-elect. You can't hear them, but I have Walter Cronkite and former President Ford in New York, and they have some questions which I'll relay to you. But first, if I may ask one question for myself, I wonder if you're as surprised by the landslide, the electoral landslide that you've received today.
Yes, you know me. You've heard me say cautiously optimistic so many times. This one is surprised.
Well, your cautious optimism must be running over tonight. Let me see if I can get a question.
Walter,
Yes,
Jerry,
Walter,
let me suggest something to you, because the audio is much better. Why don't you take off your headset and see if Governor Reagan would put it on or hold it up to his ear and that microphone, and we'll hear better, and President Ford can speak directly to him.
All right. Governor, what we're going to do is put that on your ear. And can you hear Walter?
Hello. You don't hear me because I'm not saying anything. Hello. How about the other microphone, Jerry? How about the other microphone? Could you take the other microphone, Governor Reagan? The smaller microphone there? We can barely hear you, but let's try. President Ford is here, and he wanted to congratulate you. Been trying to call you and hadn't gotten through on the phone, so we're doing it in a rather public fashion here. President Ford?
Ron, it's Jerry Ford. I've tried to call several times, but you were busy or en route to the Century Plaza. I do want to congratulate you on behalf of Betty and myself. It's a great, great victory, a very deserving victory, and as I said many times in the campaign, you'll be a fine president.
Mr. President, you and Betty, God bless you both, and I hope everybody knows in this country how hard you both worked and how you went across this country back and forth campaigning in my behalf. And this victory is certainly yours to share.
Well, give Nancy our love and the very best to you, and we'll be talking to you after you've had a couple hours sleep.
Okay.
Governor Reagan, Governor Reagan from Walter Cronkite, congratulations too, sir. We'll look forward to seeing you at the White House in your new role as the 40th President of the United States.
Thank you very much, Walter.
Could you tell me if have you got a role a job for Gerald Ford, former President of the United States here?
Well, I think that a former president always has a role, and any president who would ignore and not seek the advice and counsel of a former president would be wasting a great asset, and I'm not going to waste a great asset.
Don't let him pin you down, Ron.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you again, Governor. Thank you very much.
Mona. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Well, I told one of your competitors I would get over there, so if you don't mind and would excuse me,
Well, we're sorry we kept you so long, but if that's what we kept you from, we're glad you kept us so long.
It's nice to be here, and I thank you for getting that message through to Governor Reagan and to Nancy. I've been trying, and this worked out very well.
You betcha. I thought for a moment Governor Reagan was going to say, any former president's a friend of yours, a friend of mine.
Well, thanks very much, Walter. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, President Ford. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll have more CBS News Election Night coverage in a moment. Way up into the 400 category. It's going to be one of the major electoral sweeps of recent history. Certainly in this century, there's hardly been anything quite like this defeat that Jimmy Carter is taking tonight. He has won just 35 electoral votes, as you see. 415 have been won for Ronald Reagan. Just 4 states have gone to Jimmy Carter so far, and the District of Columbia for that total of 35 electoral votes. It certainly isn't very much. And of the states that we have been looking at, I haven't looked over the entire national board yet. I was just doing some quick running down of our states here. As I said, Carter is leading, but it's a very narrow margin in Maine, Massachusetts, and Tennessee, and we can't call any of those races for Carter yet. Even so, that would give him only 7 states. This one more than Goldwater won. Reagan is leading right now in North Carolina and South Carolina in the counted vote.
O'clock movie.
This portion of Election Night is sponsored by General Motors, people building transportation to serve people. By a company called TRW, where tomorrow is taking shape. And by Citicorp Traveler's Checks. Travel the world with us. Now from CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Well, back here at our election headquarters, we've finally gotten Governor Reagan over that 50% hurdle he's been holding on to for most of the evening in the popular vote across the country. With 68% of the vote counted now, he's gone to 51% of the vote. And Jimmy Carter has dropped to 42% of the vote from the 43 he was holding. 6% of the vote going to John Anderson, as you see. Well, across the United States, though, where we show Jimmy Carter's states that he's won in red, you see there aren't many there, just 6 of them altogether. And for Reagan, well, it's a different story. They're shown in blue, and this country is almost solidly in the Reagan colors tonight. In the electoral vote, there's where the count really shows up. Reagan, 424 electoral votes, and Jimmy Carter, 45 electoral votes. There's a good question to be asked, I think, tonight. It's about time, that time of the evening, when we begin to look into this sort of thing. We maybe don't have answers yet. That'll have to be examined even more closely, but we've got some horseback opinions, I'm sure, as to why the polls over the weekend showed 2 and 3 percentage vote spread, maybe a little more than that in some of the more drastic ones, but nobody predicting an electoral sweep anything like this. Close electoral vote it looked like. I wonder if any of our astute correspondents here have a quick answer to that one. I toss it up for grabs.
I think there were 2 things about the polls, Walter. In the first place, they were showing Reagan gaining. And in the second place, if his percentage holds at 52% and doesn't go to what is commonly called a landslide at 60%, you don't need to have a huge popular vote. His vote is wide, but not necessarily very deep. he hasn't taken a lot of states by huge margins, at least not so far.
Well, I suppose, Walter, that all of those people had been undecided for so long in the big states all went for Ronald Reagan tonight. It's kind of difficult across the South to analyze what went wrong in so many different groups because Jimmy Carter did poorly in all groups except for blacks and Hispanics. He had a worse time of it this year with all groups, young, old, various incomes, in town, out of town, than he did in 1976. He just got wrong.
Leslie, you got an idea?
Yeah, Walter, you have to believe that it was what someone in the White House said, that it was, in fact, the hostages at the last minute. That here there was this break, but he didn't seem to be able to do anything about it at all. He looked impotent once again in the foreign affairs area. You know, this whole thing broke late. There's no question about that, I don't think. And what was the factor? It just stared us right in the face. It was Jimmy Carter flying back to Washington and then having to go out again to campaign. Just totally unable to do anything with this issue, reminding us that it's been there for a year and that he was totally incapable of moving us. I just do feel that in the end, the switch of votes was because of that one issue.
That's obviously a terribly subjective thing on the part of the population. However, I think everybody would have to admit there's really nothing that the president could have done about it in those last 72 hours to further the situation. I mean, he couldn't accede to all of the requests and get them back. It may take weeks and months to do that. Henry Kissinger is suggesting tonight, just for instance, that he thinks that Reagan being in the White House will help get them back, and he bets they'll get back shortly after the inaugural. Well, that's still some time. That means that Henry Kissinger must be thinking in terms of long negotiations in order to put this package together.
But Walter, when you say, why did Jimmy Carter win? I think, first of all, I don't know that it's been said here tonight, that we should acknowledge that Ronald Reagan ran a smart, classy, high-road campaign. Not only did he fail to make a mistake, but he made a lot of the smart moves. Now, as we went along during the night making some notes, Jimmy Carter had no base or political message to offer the voters. Jimmy Carter, standing in the trial heats, consistently ran ahead of his job rating, and eventually the facts and his job rating caught up with him. Ronald Reagan used the debate to convince voters that he was not this mad Hollywood bomber from the West, that he was presidential, whether it was justified or unjustified. He convinced people of that in debates. Unemployment was the key issue all through this campaign, especially in the Midwest, where Jimmy Carter won only one state, Walter Mondale's home state, Minnesota. And then in the end, it was rejection of the party and the liberal orthodoxy that had been in the command through the 60s and the 70s. People simply wanted to change.
You know, let's hear from Bruce.